Well, it's absolutely lovely to be here today and among the company of so many progressive farm businesses thinking about data. I wanted to talk a little bit today about Leaf, some of the work that we're doing and the purpose and the drivers behind our charitable activity as an organisation, and then to reflect upon some of the sort of maybe slightly hidden reasons why data is becoming so much more integral to the conversations which we're having right the way across the supply chain in connection with farming. So Leaf is a charity, as I'm sure you know. Leaf was founded in 1991, led for many, many years by the late Caroline Drummond MBE, who was an absolute pioneer of sustainable farming. And I think at our core, we're a charity that fundamentally believes in the importance of farming as a social good. Our purpose is to promote the understanding and adoption of more sustainable farming practices, but fundamentally we believe that farming is there to produce food, and that is absolutely crucial. So as an organisation, there are three broad strands to our work. We have a very large education outreach programme, so we run Open Farm Sunday every year, but in addition to that, we also took 38,500 children out onto working farms. We facilitate careers entrance. We have a very large knowledge exchange programme. We work with some of the leading agricultural institutions in the UK and a network of 40 demonstration farms, and we try and facilitate understanding of what best practice can look like. And then, of course, we've got the Leaf Mark standard, which will be known to many of you. So the question at the moment, I suppose, is why does this matter? And I don't know if I'm reassured or not, but listening to the comments in the room about climate change being just so crucial to how we continue to operate farming businesses now, and the recognition of that within the farming sector. If we went back 10, 15 years ago, I don't think that number would have been quite as high. And it's a sort of perverse irony, I think, that we're actually starting to get recognition just as we're confronting the realities of the problems. And some of these images are from the UK. The second one there is actually in Lincolnshire, which was sent to me by Philip Wynne, our chair, who I can see is in the audience here today. And I think the note accompanied it, Philip, said something like 800 acres under a metre of water. You don't have to convince me on climate change. It's coming. The reality, of course, is, though, that agriculture is also simultaneously responsible for many of the harms that are inflicting so much damage upon our farming businesses. You know, globally, agriculture accounts for somewhere in the region of a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. This chart says it's slightly lower, but a third is commonly quoted. We also know that something like 80% of eutrophication, excess nitrogen in water systems, is attributed in some form or other to agriculture globally. And these global impacts obviously are shaping the response of policymakers in relation to how do they respond to the agricultural system. And we're seeing some of the negative repercussions of that at the moment, as well as a sort of general uplift in focus and attention falling onto our sector, for which data is going to be crucial in terms of how we respond to it. As Leaf, our view is very strongly that we believe that integrated farm management systems ultimately will be the key to being able to sustain food supplies for a growing global population, at the same time as you running effective businesses that are resilient and that can balance the societal expectation around compliance. And one of the significant problems that we've really got is a question of trust. Most people in the world outside of farming now do not understand how farming works. And that is presenting some very, very significant challenges, and arguably, I think, underpins some of the very recent public issues which have been so widely debated. You know, I was at the same conference that was referenced by Andrew, where Tom Bradshaw stood up and said, actually climate change is our single biggest global challenge, right in the midst of all of these challenges on taxation as well. And the reality is that data is transforming our capacity to engage with these global issues. And when I look at data and I think through the lens of Leaf, having spent my career, most of my 25 years have been working in the food industry. I look at data and compliance issues, and I think actually data is increasingly integral to how we engage with policy environments. It's increasingly integral to the governance controls and how systems such as Leaf Mark operate, and also it's crucial to farm supply chains and building trust. And then fundamentally, it's becoming increasingly crucial to businesses such as yours in terms of both assessing the impact of what you're doing and looking at productivity. So if we then take a step back and we then think about, okay, what's the retail perspective around all of this? Now, I don't come directly from a retail background. My background was in the food industry in branded food production for Unilever, then Jordan Cereals and then latterly Associated British Foods. But as I look at the retail environment, I think one of the misconceptions is that the retailers are solely interested in price. And actually, I think the nuance of the environment that they're operating within needs to be understood as we assess it. And I think there are broadly four forces that are impacting retailers. Of course, one of them is access to food. I mean, you can't have a retailer that's not got the food in the store to sell in the first place. Secondly, of course, price is a factor. Price inevitably is a factor in any commercial relationship. But crucially, so too is shopper demand and trust. And how do we demonstrate trust to the outside world? And then finally, these incredible considerations of license to operate, so legal compliance. And they will be thinking, particularly the large retailers, will be looking through a 5-10-year horizon in terms of how do they manage the operation of their store environment to confront the emerging plethora of legislation that is coming their way. It's like, if you think of the average retail supermarket contains 30,000 stock-keeping units. You imagine the complexity of the supply chains that underpins all of that. Now, the reality is, globally, environmental, social, governance legislation, ESG legislation it's referred to, is growing exponentially. And this is stemming from programs within the United Nations. So you'll have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, for example. These are shaping the approach globally towards legislation to confront issues such as human rights abuses, climate change, concerns about biodiversity loss. And this slide, I think, don't look at the detail of it necessarily, but just look at the sway and the movement as we've been coming forward in terms of the volume of legislation coming forward globally related to ESG. And then we have to relate that back to what does that mean, not just for retailers, but for large corporate entities. And the reality is the reporting and governance requirements are accelerating rapidly. And I've pulled out some here, there are a multiplicity of them, but the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, so large corporations reporting into the city, having to disclose where their most significant climate-related risk sits and the steps that they're taking to mitigate it. Similarly, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures being driven by the IFRS, so international standards for city reporting. And when we think and we look at the requirements that are coming out of the EC, the European Union, for example, in relation to legislation, agriculture is designated a high-risk sector, and therefore the thresholds for reporting are even more advanced. So there is an increasing need for governance and control across the supply chain to demonstrate compliance, to demonstrate engagement with addressing risk. And that has implications for your businesses. Now, I think there are a number of broad implications, and I think fundamentally what this distills down to in terms of the decisions that you will have to make as business owners is whether you're going to be passive or active in terms of how you face into those. And I think the broad pressures are going to be, the pressure to demonstrate environmental due diligence is only going to continue. And I think increasingly aggregated data sets are going to become much more important, both in terms of facilitating trade flows, but also in terms of assuring different supply chains to supermarket requirements, etc. And then the question comes of how do you wish to face into that? And of course, that is a choice. Now, I think there's a very strong case for active data management. And I've set out three things that I think are significant in that context. First and foremost, I think there are some big opportunities there for businesses that can demonstrate engagement with environmental due diligence and back that with the data to substantiate the claims that come out of it. And I've just pulled out some examples of programs that Leaf is supporting as a charity. So we're working with Waitrose on their movement towards more regen-based farming systems. They're working with a number of stakeholder farms at the moment to work out what that means. Marks & Spencer similarly are offering contracts. The business I came out of, Jordan Cereals originally, has for the past 30, 40 years paid premiums to farmers for participating in programs that give book claims around biodiversity. So I think there are some number of significant opportunities there. Most recently, Leaf has announced a partnership with HSBC Bank, which offers preferential rates on loan fees for organisations that are Leaf Mark certified, for example. So some big opportunity. I think there's also a point here about trust. And data can convey trust. Now, the point I'm conveying here is that many of the data sets that we're looking at that are conveying the message that agriculture is a problem are global data sets. And the problem for UK farms is often we're doing really good work, but if you're seen in the context of an agricultural supply chain, which in other parts of the world is causing enormous harm, there is a risk that the damage is seen as being indicative of how you are running your operations, which is not necessarily the case. And this is a headline from The Economist magazine from 2021, for example. Treating beef like coal would make a big dent in greenhouse gas emissions. Well, globally, that number is correct. Beef is a very big emitter. But when one looks at the detail of that, and we look at beef from different parts of the world, we can see there's a very significant difference between beef grown in a European context, on pasture typically, and that which is being reared in Africa, typically on land that's been deforested. So there's a huge difference globally in those numbers. If we want to substantiate and make the case for the produce that comes off our farms, we have to be able to use data to build that. And then finally, good data cuts costs. And I think when I joined Leaf in 2023, I had the great privilege of visiting a very large number of excellent farms, which are Leaf demonstration farms. And I asked all of those farmers why it is that the Leaf Mark systems matter. And consistently the feedback was, running a business through the Leaf Mark frameworks has helped me cut costs and be more effective. And that's through looking at the cost of inputs, the efficiency of production. Now this is some data I pulled from some slides from the United States, which is modeling from the investment sector, predicting that the combination of AI and precision agriculture in the United States can cut costs by up to a third over time. That's the backing, that's the investment backing that they're making. So, to conclude, I think it's fair to say global pressure on agricultural systems are only going to intensify. We're right at the beginning of the transition into the worst effects of climate change, unfortunately. The UK is forecast to come out far better than many other parts of the world, but it's fundamentally going to change the shape of how we need to run our businesses to adapt and produce food. That's going to present us with both risks and opportunities. And I think data can be key to unlocking some of the best opportunities. And increasingly, I think if we take a medium, long-term horizon, we're going to see dynamic data, live data, becoming much more integral to the operation of trade flows and systems across the world. So thank you very much indeed. Okay.
We've just got 1 minute before we break for coffee. I was just wanting to ask you one question. When Leaf links up with those supermarkets you were talking about, how much data do they need from your Leaf producers to feed into the supply chain of those supermarkets that you deal with? How does that work?
So we work with most of the large supermarkets. We're signatories to farm data principles, which has been alluded to already. So we aggregate data, and we're typically looking at practice management data across the system, and that's very actively looked at. And I can say I think there's a genuine will within the agricultural directors of the large supermarkets to try and find solutions that confront for them, a very complicated, fragmented system, and how do we put systems and structures and data in place to target knowledge development, etc., to show movement on some of these underpinning environmental trends. Because I think fundamentally there is a recognition that unless, points like biodiversity, unless the numbers on biodiversity start to go in the right way, unless the issues around eutrophication start to ease, the policy pressure is just going to continue. And that's a fundamental issue around trust and license to operate for their businesses as much as it is for ours.
And how much help do you give your Leaf farmers with data and technology?
Well, I think if I'm honest, we could probably do more. We are looking at how we improve our IT systems currently. We have a live project going on at the moment to try and improve the background. Indeed, we're working with Julian on some of that work. It's complicated to do so. We have a number of projects where we've worked, for example, with Horizon projects, looking at data application in agriculture, which we've shared knowledge exchange out. But I think fundamentally we're on the same journey as everybody else of trying to move towards having better data management systems that can interface more effectively with a multiplicity of other systems which are being deployed on farm.
Thank you very much indeed, David.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.